Chapter 24, The First Casualties of War. Nyoka's war camp near the Twilight Ruins, 338 solar year. My master, it is good to see you again. A weak and tired Razi proclaimed as he walked into the command tent near the old Sindarian Twilight Ruins. Your plan was brilliant. All the pieces are falling into place, perfectly. The Dark Lord looked at the brash young man in an expressionless way. Thou hast returned, Razi, in perfect time. Soon thou shalt behold with thine own eyes when my ascension shall be made complete. My apotheosis is at hand. Indeed, thou willst watch as I becometh a god, and this world becometh nothing but dust, ash, and death. One of the three that freed Razi spoke up. Lord Nyoka, while we were escaping back here, my ravens flew to me and shared their little secrets. It seems the Phalanans are gathering their forces from all areas of the country and are marching them southwest toward us. Even the royal city is nearly empty of guards. Your plan to draw them out and away from the Sun Rune has worked, my god king. Razi annoyed, you idiots can speak. These last few days you said nothing to me, and now suddenly you speak so casually. Another of the trio spoke up, we were given no orders to speak to you. So, we did not. The last spoke up in a monotone, we only follow the orders of Master Nyoka. Not to be deterred, Razi asked, well, who the hell are you three? What are your names? The first spoke up again, we are what's left of the order of Tessers that remained loyal to Master Nyoka, the true ruler of Nagara. The second spoke up as well, we've been trained in the darkest of arts of runic magic. The third added, also, we now command our patriarch's undead army into battle for him while he completes his plans to become a god. As for our names, we have none. But if Master Nyoka is to be called Death, then, you may call me Plague. He shall be called War. And that one shall be called Famine. Shocked, Razi demanded how could they control legions of undead forces. The three in unison lifted their right hands to reveal what looked like crescent moon tattoos on the back of their hands. They explained that Nyoka had made them out of his own powerful half-moon rune. These newly birthed crescent moon runes couldn't create undead warriors like the half-moon rune or its true rune parent could, but they were powerful enough to command and control undead things such as zombies and alike. The young warrior was incensed at this point with jealousy and anger. Why was he not chosen to command the army? Why didn't he get a rare and powerful rune as well? Had he not sacrificed so much for his lord? He gave up his freedom, allowed himself to be captured, then be humiliated by those Phalana dogs in that dungeon. As he was about to rage to Nyoka, the man's dark eerie voice filled the bleak command tent. Thy time has cometh to cut the head off the Phalana snake. Stopped in his tracks, Razi asked, what do you mean, Lord Nyoka? The one called Famine interjected, while you were away, our master devised an additional plan since Godwin can no longer be trusted to do what's in our best interests instead of his own. Thus, we are going to kidnap the princess. Successfully this time. Whereas your plan failed so terribly before. Ours will not. Razi was ready to draw his sword on the spot and kill this man, but looking at Nyoka he halted. He went on, then, we are going to kill them all, the queen, her knights, along with the whole royal family. With their leadership destroyed, chaos will ensue just as it has in Nagara. Then, while everyone is confused and fleeing from his undead army, his lordship shall be free to take the Sun Rune without distractions. Nyoka added in a hollow voice, silence ye slave. I did not saith thou could speaketh. But, we shalt slay them all, but saith for that girl. That daughter of the Sunday we needeth her pure and unspoiled royal blood for the ritual to break those foolish seals those damnable Sindarians placed upon my Sun Rune. Tonight, we shall taketh the dawn and twilight runes as well as the girl. Once thy seals are broken, I shall take what is mine. My birthright. At this, 12 more men walked into the room. Led by Hakan, they were what was left of the Nethergate forces still loyal to Nyoka. As the rest of the Nethergate order was engaged in the civil war in Nagara, Most in the order were dead and the rest soon would follow, as the warring political factions in that country viewed them as the greatest threat and wanted them gone first. Nyoka gave them their various targets and assignments. He ordered the 3 crescent rune bearers to remain here to prepare the undead army to strike once the Falanin leadership was all dead, as it would be the perfect chance to attack their foes. He told them that 2 assassins each would go after the Queen, Aelin, Godwin, and Robert. Hakon and another assassin would go get Alinda and kill Rose. Razi and one other from Nethergate would kill the guards and retrieve the Dawn rune from East Palace. While Nyoka, himself, and the last Nethergate henchman would retrieve the Twilight rune, as well as kill the older princess and Queen's Knight, who they found out were also heading to West Palace to retrieve the Rune of Dusk. And so, with that, these dark forces went forth to fulfill Nyoka's ambitions. That evening, as Godwin had finally returned to his home, he had his servants go and inform all the nobles to prepare for war. Many of the rich and powerful were starting to warm up to the idea of Godwin leading them, as he seemed more attuned with their way of thinking than Aelin ever had been. They offered up their own personal guards in addition to the normal Falanin military soldiers already stationed there. More good news for Marcus arrived, as a certain item he had been waiting for nearly 3 years to acquire was at last his. His own personal rune sage had finally tracked down the rare and very powerful Pale Gate rune and brought it to him. It was a unique child rune from the true rune known as the Gate rune. This rune, like its parent, had the power to summon powerful magical creatures from other dimensions to attack one's foes. Only the strongest and most adept magicians could use such a rune. And Marcus Godwin was, indeed, one of the few. Moreover, his Nagarian conspirator had kept his word for now. He had kept his undead forces contained in the southwest. However, it would only be a matter of time before the old high priest's ambitions got the better of him and their arrangement would be over. He would have to be dealt with soon. And if he could be the one to kill him and save Falena, then he would be a national hero, thought Marcus. Thus, his ambitions of obtaining a powerful political foothold in this quendom for him and his family name could at last be fully realized. No sooner had he finished these thoughts, when 2 shadowy cloaked figures appeared in his office, as they had several times before. Godwin, unsurprised by their presence, continued drinking his evening wine, before he said to them, "I have no new news right now for your master. Does he want something?" "Yes, he does," said the first man as he uncloaked his body to reveal a sword in his hand. "He wants your life." Both assassins drew their blades now. Marcus remained calm, sitting at his table still drinking. As they came closer, however, he kicked his table forward at them. They both dodged to either side. Marcus stood up and said, pointing to his forehead, "I got a new rune today, but haven't had a chance to really test it. Care to be my first test subjects?" Immediately, the room turned sky blue with light from the rune's power. Also, the room got cold and frost started to form on the walls as an icy emerald serpent materialized. Robert dodged the blow. One Nethergate assassin thrusted his sword at the knight's chest. He had been caught off guard as he was walking back to his room from using the latrine. Somehow these 2 assassins had infiltrated the fortress of Durat, filled with thousands of soldiers, for the purpose of killing one man, Robert. The fighting grew intense, but this was an empty hall. Moreover, the older brother had specifically asked to sleep here in order to be alone and away from people for the night. And to make things worse, he was unarmed. The 2 assassins were toying with him relentlessly, as all he could do was dodge. He saw a suit of armor in display down the hall. Robert ran for it. The display had no sword, but it did have a medium-sized shield attached. The Queen's Knight ripped the shield from its grip and was at least able to block their blows better now, but he was still greatly outmatched. The sounds of metal swords clinging against a steel shield began to echo throughout the hallways and corridors. Several night guards heard the noises and went to investigate. As they got closer to the source, they realized that Sir Robert was sleeping in this normally vacant wing of the castle tonight. Just as the men were about to examine the noise, they heard a blood-curdling scream. Someone had been stabbed and was now dying. The guards quickly ran around the corner as a scene of blood covering the ground and part of a wall met their eyes. One man was dead on the ground and two were alive beside him. At a private home, which his family owned in Lord Lake, Alan was sitting at his desk writing out orders and messages to be given to his various officers that night by candlelight. He had a half-drunk bottle of wine and an empty glass next to him. It was not in his nature to drink so much. But he had been under extreme pressure the last few days and was having issues sleeping. He figured the wine would help, which it had, as he was now ready for bed. Finishing the last written order, he stood up. Then, two figures walked into his room utterly unannounced. Alan turned to see who it was. He held up the candle in his hand so the dim light could help his old eyes see better. There before him were two Nethergate assassins with weapons at the ready. Alan didn't overreact. He calmly said, "I thought they might try this. Look, I am too old and too tired to fight you both. So, let's get this over with quickly, shall we? But before we do, would you permit this old man to have one last drink before he dies?" The assassins walked closer to him, but didn't stop him from pouring the bottle into his glass with one hand, while holding the candle with the other hand. He raised his glass, and offered up cheers. He took a very large gulp from the glass, nearly drinking it all. The assassins watched on perplexedly, but not threatened by the old man's action. Alan put his glass down and picked up his empty bottle once more with his free hand. "That's enough," one of the intruders said. The other added, "It's time to die, old man." Alan said nothing in reply. Then, he strangely lifted the candle up to his face as the two warriors approached him ready to kill him. He had not swallowed the wine, but now spit it out onto the assassins. The very flammable strong-proof alcohol passed through the lit candle and onto them. Both were covered in wine and were partially on fire now. Alan took the empty bottle and broke the bottom of it off by smashing it against the side of the desk. He then thrusted the sharp-edged bottle at the neck of one of his would-be distracted assassins. The two Marine Knights, Clark and Duncan Egan, peered out the window from their third-story hotel room toward the palace. The inn was in the center of town but still offered a great view of the city and castle. Both knights were on edge as so few city patrols were on duty. Tanya was sitting on the couch reading a book by the fireplace. Desmond was teaching Daniel how to play a card game. Everyone was happy at the success of their mission and formation of the trade agreement, but all of it was being overshadowed by news of this invading army of undead creatures. Even with all her tactical training, Tanya didn't really know how to combat such a force beyond the conventional means of fire and holy type runic spells for dealing with undead foes. With Laszlo no longer around, which they all understood why he had to leave, everyone didn't feel as safe, or that is to say comforted by his presence knowing all that he was capable of doing. Thus, they had agreed to leave at the first available ship, which was tomorrow late afternoon from Mistrais. Elimark had offered up this idea herself. She explained that they could no longer spare the extra troops to watch over them at East Palace, which is why they had not returned there after the signing banquet a few days ago. Lieutenant Egan stepped away from the opened window and said, "It sure is quiet out there tonight. Gives me the creeps." "I know what you mean," replied Clark, "I just keep waiting for something to happen." Just then there was a small knock on the door. Everyone in the room jumped with surprise, particularly after what the spear-carrying knight had just said. Daniel was so startled that he had fallen over in his chair and was trying to stand up as the two warriors grabbed their weapons and held them at the ready. "Who is it?" asked Tanya in a loud and stern voice. "It's me, Alinda. Can I come in?" Everyone let out a collective sigh of relief. Tanya, more casual now, opened the door as Alinda and her bodyguard entered the room, and she closed the door behind them. Both Rose and the princess had been wearing traveling cloaks complete with hoods over their normal clothes so as not to draw attention to themselves as they walked through the city streets. "My dear girl, what are you doing out of the palace at such a late hour like this?" A concerned Desmond scolded her in a grandfatherly caring way. Alinda removed her hood and cloak and let her platinum hair shine forth and spoke softly. I am sorry to come at such a late hour, Mr. Desmond. But I just had to see you before you left tomorrow. I wanted to say goodbye in person. You guys have meant so much to me over this past year. Ouch. Rose. What are you doing? Rose had grabbed the princess's arm and was pulling her to the side of the room. Duncan and Clark had not missed it either as they too grabbed their weapons and forced the two other diplomats off to the side of the room. Crack. Smash. Two assassins came busting in through either window in an instant. They threw several poisonous-tipped darts the second they landed. These darts didn't kill their target as their previous ones had, but only left the victim unconscious. They didn't want to risk accidentally killing Alinda and having to explain that failure to Nyoka. Clark, Duncan, and Rose all got hit by them as they shielded the others with their bodies. Rose cried out, "No, not again!" before she fell to the ground unconscious in mere moments along with the Gaian soldiers. Hakan and his underling stood up to their fullest height now with a look of pure glee and victory on their faces. The Nethergate leader spoke, "That was easier than I thought it would be. You're coming with us, Your Highness." "No. Like hell she is." A defiant Desmond stood up and got in front of her. "I like you, Grandpa. You got balls." "Still a mission is a mission," replied Hakan with a smile on his face. He took the back of his hand and slapped Desmond to the ground. "You barbarians," yelled Danya enraged, attacking an old man. "Shut up, woman. Or next time I'll use my sword and not my hand," retorted Hakan. The underling now inquired, "What do you want to do with the others? Lord Nyoka gave no orders about them, so just kill them. We only need the girl alive," barked the boss. Alinda stood up. "No, wait. Stop. If I agree to go with you peacefully and not fight or try to run away, will you spare these people? Let them live, please." Hakan's grin grew wider. "You know what, sure. I am feeling extra generous tonight. Plus, this will save me the trouble of having to tie you up and carry your skinny little ass all the way back to the base." "Don't. You can't," yelled Danya and Desmond nearly in unison. Daniel was still too afraid even to move as he remained quiet and fearful in the corner. "I will be okay," the princess said in a calm, but remorseful, cadence. Hakan took her by the hand and was leading her out of the room, when he turned to his henchman and said, "You know what, I've changed my mind. Kill them." Alinda screamed as tears began to fall. She tried to free her wrist from Hakan's clutches, but it was no use as his grip was too tight. The underling Nethergate warrior unsheathed his blade and gloating he said, "I am sure glad you saw these two leave the castle, boss, and decided to have us split up to follow them. I am sure by now the other two have killed the queen and her guards as well." Alinda stopped yelling and struggling when she heard this. "Mother." The assassin lifted his blade at Danya and said, "Well, where are my manners? Ladies first, right?" Tanya closed her eyes waiting, then she heard the sound. The sound of a sword slicing through flesh and blood. But she felt no pain. Perplexed, she opened her eyes. The assassin staggered a bit before falling to his knees hunched over. He had a short sword lodged right through the center of his chest. The front of the blade was sticking out of his stomach. He was dead in moments. Tanya and everyone looked toward the doorway where the blade had been thrown from. There in the dimly lit hallway was a silhouette of a man. As he entered the room, they saw him. He was dressed in brown shorts and wore a brown coat over his metal chest plate. His medium-length brown hair was held back by a red bandana. It was Laszlo. "You may have followed them, but I followed you," he said powerfully. "Laszlo!" yelled a tearful Alinda with joy and excitement. The true rune bearer leapt off his feet and holding his remaining blade in the air he was coming down on Hakan's position. The assassin had no choice but to let go of Alinda and move to avoid meeting the same fate as his subordinate. He drew his blade as Laszlo met it with his own steel. The two warriors matched each other move for move. But it was clear to the Nethergate warrior that Laszlo was starting to gain the upper hand. He had never seen anyone with swordsmanship skills like this boy's before, he thought. He knew he had to change tactics if he wanted to still get the girl and leave this place alive. The leader of Nethergate took out his last few remaining sleeping darts and threw them at Laszlo. The old warrior stopped his attack and deflected them both quickly with his short sword. The islander had used a lot of runic magic today in summoning enough power for Iolis to find him. Yet, he knew he still had enough magic left for one small attack and figured it would be enough for this guy. He raised his left arm and calmly said, "Eternal Ordeal." Immediately, the icon of the rune of punishment shone forth as red and black rays of lights began to fall on Hakan as a small unholy scream echoed around the room. The magical burns began to pierce his light armor and leave deep marks and burns on his body. However, before the magic attack could finish its work, the killer jumped out the window. Laszlo ran to the opening to try and see which way he had gone, but the assassin had vanished into the night without a trace. Alinda ran to Laszlo and leapt into his arms so quickly he nearly fell over catching her. Tanya, recalling what Laszlo had told her about these Nethergate fiends and their poisonous darts and what he had done the last time he fought them. She ran to the dead underling and searched his pouch, and sure enough there was an antitoxin to the chemical. She administered some to Rose and the other two men. A few moments later they were coming to. Rose, groggy, but awake, cried out, "Princess, watch out. Darts." Before she realized it was all over. Shocked, but very grateful at seeing Laszlo here, she quickly figured out what had happened when she looked over and saw his short sword still lodged in the back of the dead assassin. "Is everyone all right?" An equally tired Duncan asked as he, likewise, tried to stagger to his feet. Just as the old warrior was about to speak, a bright green and yellow light and sounds of thunder came pouring out from the windows at the Sun Palace. "That was a lightning spell, I think," interceded Tanya. "Oh my God, Mother. They said other Nethergate warriors were going to kill her as well," gasped Alinda. Exhausted, Laszlo began to catch his second wind. He rose to his fullest height once more, grabbed his other sword, and wiped off the blood while telling the others, "Wait here. It should be safe now. I'll be back shortly." No one argued or protested. Rose wanted to go, but she knew she was too weak right now to do anything, but slow down. Alinda, surprisingly, didn't protest either. Laszlo reasoned she must still be in shock. Not wasting another moment he dashed down the stairs. The people on the lower floors had heard the yelling, screaming, and sounds of battle and had locked themselves in their rooms out of fear, figured Laszlo as he ran out the building and didn't pass a single soul. He ran to the palace, where there were no guards stationed in front of the main gate, which was open. More concern now filled his mind. He ran into the palace where he saw a few dead bodies of royal guardsmen laying on the floor of the entryway. He, then, proceeded into the throne room, weapons at the ready. Every candle in the room was lit, so the room was very bright. As his eyes quickly adjusted to the light, he could make out certain shapes. He saw more dead guards in their red and orange uniforms covered in their own blood. He looked to the throne, where he could see a woman sitting on it, but not moving. Laszlo moved toward Elimark, but before he could get there the doors behind him swung open. It was Alinda. She came running into the room toward the throne. She ran past Laszlo, who still had his weapons ready to attack, but she had gone right past him toward her unconscious mother. The islander looked next to the throne. He now saw one dead Nethergate on the ground. Tanya had been right, he had died from magical wounds. A very powerful lightning attack. She cried, "Mother, please wake up. It's me. Please, don't be dead. Please." "Relax, child. The queen is not dead, only sleeping for the moment. She got hit by one of those assassin's darts," said an airy and misty voice that sounded familiar to Laszlo. He spun round to see a man wearing a simple tan robe. He quickly recognized him. It was Simeon, an old acquaintance of Kyrill's that he had met and fought together with some 30 years ago. Then another familiar face walked into the room. "He gave us the slip. Tee-hee. I guess my Thundrune gave him quite the fright when he saw what I did to his friend. Sounded a very sexy feminine voice. It was Jean, Laszlo's old rune mistress from his days aboard the Dauntless. Another shorter figure appeared as well. Laszlo didn't recognize her, but he did recognize the Nagarian clerical robes she was wearing. Nyoka wore a similar kind, but with different gold trimming and markings he recalled. While Simeon had retrieved a vial of antitoxin from the dead assassin to give the queen, the tiny one spoke. Great power is coming from this one, Ursh does sense. Is this the one who you were talking about, comrades Simeon and Jean? They both nodded in the affirmative. The one Laszlo reasoned was called Ursh, or so he thought. It was hard to tell since she spoke so oddly, began speaking again. Alinda held her mother, while Simeon gave her the cure. She was still too focused on Elimark to give much attention to these three strangers. The short cleric continued, "Oh, one chosen by the true rune of atonement and forgiveness, Ursh is in need of your help. Ursh's brother is too powerful for Ursh to face alone." Razi was still very fatigued from his ordeal in the prison, but taking some mega medicine and eating some food he felt better as he and his Nethergate partner traveled incognito across Felena. Using the Nethergate warrior ninja's vanishing technique they were able to travel the great distance pretty quickly. Razi was impressed as he made a mental note that he too would need to learn this useful technique as well. Soon they arrived at the East Palace as the sun was setting. Waiting for darkness they made their move. They easily snuck by the few remaining guards patrolling the entry gates. Only the guards who stood in front of the building that housed the Dawn Rune, day and night, would prove to be an issue. Despite the two guards being highly skilled in combat, they were still no match for Razi's nor the Nethergate warriors' swordsmanship. Both guards died quickly. Razi and the assassin entered the forbidden room, as only members of the Falanin royal family could enter this place. The young exile saw the Dawn Rune embedded in a white marble statue of a queenly-looking woman. The right hand of the marble queen was extended and pulsating power that was blue in color. Razi could sense its immense power. He now understood why Nyoka wanted it so badly. This rune's power, alone, was on par with the half-moon rune. He could feel it. What if he could have this power for himself? He wouldn't care about some stupid crescent rune. Not with power like this at his command, he thought. The power-hungry young man reached toward the queenly statue when a sharp voice suddenly pierced the silence like a knife. It was a female voice and it said, "Fools. Unworthy fools. Such power is not meant for the likes of you. Step away from the Dawn Rune, before I destroy you where you stand." Both men whirled around at the direction the voice was coming from, but there was no one there. Abruptly a figure appeared out of nowhere. It was a tall and very pale middle-aged woman. She had dark hair and eyes as well. She was dressed in a black robe with gold trimmings and wore a hood over part of her head. To Razi, she looked like a crazy gothic druid priestess. She gave the same warning in that same cold and demanding tone once more, "I shall destroy you, fools. If you don't leave now. The Dawn Rune isn't meant for ones such as you." The boastful Razi drew his sword. "Lady, I don't know who you are, but I am having a very bad day. And now this. That sharp tongue of yours, I am going to cut it out." They exited the stagecoach. Syra and Grass stretched out their legs after their long journey to West Palace. It was now nearly sunset to boot. "You know, my lady, I don't think we've spent this much time together, since I was your bodyguard prior to the Sacred Games," he said. The older princess responded, "Yes, it has been a while, hasn't it? I do miss our keen and philosophical discussions. Marcus, the son bless him, is smart and very cunning, but thoughtful and philosophical he is not." Both chuckled as old close friends do after they had not seen each other in years. And like old friends they soon picked up the conversation where they had left off many months ago. They talked and walked to the sacred room where the Twilight Rune was kept. The old woman who was the rune mistress and caretaker of the estate greeted them. He wondered who was this woman that seemed to know Princess Syra so well. The princess explained she was the one who had told her the history of her family and their relationship to the 3 runes of Falena to her the last time she was here for the marriage preparation ritual. Grace waited outside talking with the West Palace guards, while Syra went inside to get the Twilight rune. The old caretaker didn't like the idea of the rune being taken, but she followed the orders of Queen Elimark and Commander Aelin. As before, the Twilight rune instantly took to Syra without a moment's haste. She was the one the rune preferred most of all. The aged woman had not seen such an affinity between Solar Rune and royal family member in decades. Syra could once again feel the immense power of the rune of Twilight coursing throughout her body. It was both terrifying and exhilarating to her. She thought how someone like Marcus, who was obsessed with both runes and power, would be very jealous if he could see her now. As she exited the room, she showed Grass her left hand and the crest of the Twilight rune. He had only seen images of it before and never the real thing. The knight was very intrigued by it to say the least. But not wanting to waste any more time, the two quickly made their way to the carriage. Suddenly, there was a sound like a howling wind and then complete silence. Nyoka materialized before them. "I sense thou, child of the Sunday, thou haveth my Twilight rune. Giveth it to me, or I shall slay thee and taketh it." The swordsman drew his weapon and stood between Nyoka and the next queen of Falena and said firmly, "So, my hunch was correct. Razi was just the puppet, you were the one pulling the strings all along, weren't you? Not that it matters. You are not touching her or that rune, over my dead body." Nyoka's face was expressionless, but his voice was cold and haughty, "As thou wishes." With those words, he nodded his head. Suddenly, out of nowhere a Nethergate underling appeared behind them. Gress, as though he were expecting this, swung around, parried the sword attack of the assassin by stepping to the side. He then countered with his rapier, slicing the exposed ninja across his neck. The assassin fell helplessly to the ground, dropping his blade, clutching his throat, and bleeding out. Soon death would be upon him. The Queen's Knight turned back toward the ancient wizard saying, "I fought in the last war too. I know how these devils operate. And I suspected you might try this. Now, men." Swiftly, the 4 West Palace guards who Grass had been talking to earlier, appeared out from behind some bushes and side buildings. All were holding bows and arrows, which they promptly let fly as the Queen Knight had commanded. Nyoka didn't move. He merely lifted his rod as a purple-colored shield formed around him, stopping the arrows from piercing their target. Again, he spoke coldly, only saying, "Fools." He raised his right hand as the half-moon rune's glyph started to glow. Dark blue and purple lights swirled around him. Several zombies seemed to rise from the ground, taking the guards by surprise, killing most of them all before they could reload. Gress had thought Nyoka might try to steal the Twilight rune from them, which is why he had told the guards outside the sacred room to prepare for an ambush. However, he had not planned on Nyoka, himself, showing up, just more of his puppet slaves. He had taken a gamble and lost. He knew he was no match for Nyoka's dark power. He looked at Syra, who looked back at him. He whispered to her 4 words, "I am sorry. Run." With that he took off toward Nyoka as recklessly as Robert had been against Razi. Nyoka raised his rod with his rune hand as a ray of blue light came shooting forth from it. The beam struck the charging knight in the chest. Gress fell over instantly. No last words or dramatic gesturing with his eyes or hands. He was simply motionless. The Queen's Knight was dead. Syra had stopped running when she saw the ray of blue light out of the corner of her eye. Now she yelled out in a frenzy of emotion at the sudden death of her dear old friend and protector. She could feel anger and a fire swelling up inside her. The Twilight rune responded to these emotions in kind as the future queen raised her left hand out of pure instinct, and the power of the Twilight rune was unleashed. Spheres of golden energy, like mini suns, came raining down on Nyoka and his undead forces, who were now heading toward her and the old caretaker that had been watching all this unfold several meters away. The undead and the dying assassin were burned to ash, but Nyoka was unharmed. The high priest, for the first time in a long time, laughed and said, "Thou hath already tapped deeply into thy rune's power. That attack is one of the rune's strongest spells, but it matters not. You shalt render it unto me, or I shall cut it off from thy body." She yelled back, still full of pure rage at her former bodyguard's death, "You liked that spell, did you? You want this rune's full power? Here. You can have it." Syra reached deep down in her spirit, commanding the solar rune to give her all its power to attack Nyoka. It responded to her request as the icon of the twilight rune appeared in the air once more. Raising her left hand as beams of golden and orange energy appeared swirling around her, which she now redirected and sent toward Nyoka. Another rune's image appeared in the air. She didn't recognize it, but it seemed to resemble a moon, or rather was in the shape of a half-moon. Again, blue and purple rays of energy swirled around his body, which the old cleric directed at Syra. As runic energy collided in an explosion of force and power, nearby trees were broken over. Buildings around them started to break apart from the magical force being applied against them. Some people who lived at West Palace came to investigate this awesome sight, but were blown away or killed by streaks of runaway energy. The injured caretaker took refuge behind a fallen tree as a look of terror filled her face. This clashing of power sounded and felt like one giant thunderstorm to Syra. "I am impressed, daughter of the sun. Our runes are equal in power, but let me showeth thou what centuries of magical experience means against a novice like thee," roared the white-robed magician. He took a deep breath and added his own magical acuity into his rune. Now he could feel the twilight rune's power unbalancing in his favor. Likewise, Syra could feel herself waning against his relentless onslaught. Before, she had pure emotion to help her power the rune, but that surge of adrenaline was fading too. She felt her body growing very fatigued. He was right, she thought, their runes may be equal, but their magical skills were not. Suddenly, she fell over and passed out from sheer exhaustion. He stopped casting his spell. Nyoka walked over to the sleeping royal as a new idea entered his dark mind. He would not take just the rune, but this woman as well. She might be useful to him. He grabbed her and both vanished in a flash of light. Now he had not only the twilight rune, but also the next queen of Falena, for a hostage.